Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters, and today I'm doing a very special episode, something I've haven't done really before, but I am actually having a guest, and today I decided that to make sure that it matters, then I must invite someone that is just a little bit, maybe just by a lot smarter than I am. So here I got Professor Darren Gerdes. I'm going to hand it to you. Can you say a couple of words of where you're from and how did we get to this? Because this was your
Yeah,
pitch.
how we actually got here was an interesting thing. You gave a shout out about my channel on your channel, and then I reached out to say thank you because somebody told me, some of my viewers told me that that's where they came from, and then we started talking behind the scenes, saying, hey, as we go up toward the anniversary of the 1 year anniversary, we should talk about like how you see things, how I see things, like what we've learned over time, and we've blown past the 1 year mark, but still, I mean, we come to this from various, and I found this just true with most of the YouTube bloggers, vloggers, whatever, that are trying to cover this. We've all been doing other things, and then we just got real focused on Ukraine right away. And like, what brought you there? What brought me there? Let's just talk about that and what we've learned.
Yeah, and pretty much that's going to be today's talking point. We're going to talk about what's there for Ukraine, and I'm going to ask you some of the things of your specific perspective because I think you're bringing to the table something that none of the bloggers around are bringing, and that is because you've done an extensive work discussing leadership. I believe it was mostly in management leadership, like was business management leadership,
Yeah.
but
So let me go and qualify that because people ask like, well, what do you teach? What? So I'm a professor. My PhD is in organizational leadership. Now, organizational leadership tends to be interdisciplinary, right? So it spans multiple boundaries. We tend to be housed in business departments just because they don't know where else to put us. But so I'm trying to filter everything that I'm looking through the lens of leadership. So I'm far more interested in the infighting in the military and political apparatus in Russia than I am on the like what's going on in the daily battle scenes. Daily battle scenes are good. I follow you and others to understand what's actually going on, but I'm also using that to help me understand the context of what I'm looking at a higher level, trying to understand. Like, so Prigozhin, for example, just announced that he intends to run for, I don't know how he could do this, run for president in Ukraine. Well, since he's a Russian citizen, that sounds a little absurd, but he has political ambitions. And those political ambitions aren't playing very well with Putin, who I think is helping constrict Prigozhin because of that, and he doesn't get along with Gerasimov, so they're not playing together nicely. He got along with Servakin, but not with Gerasimov. So I don't know how to quantify it, but that lack of getting along or working together has to be worth battalions, if not brigades, because you can't coordinate when the structure the leadership structure doesn't work. So that's the kind of thing that I focus on. That's the kind of thing that I find fascinating. So I come to it very differently than maybe you do or other vloggers.
yeah, and this kind of the conflict that you just described, it's something that we've seen before in Putin's court, right? Something that was during his rule, just period in itself. Is this just a style of leadership that, like, how to run a country, like how to be an authoritarian leader? I'm not sure if you have like a studied position on it, but maybe at least you have an interesting take, because what I have is only the perspective of a commoner, what Putin is, what Putin is not. And obviously there is a lot of like KGB practices he's doing. And in my perspective, Putin is a lot more, how do we say, he's a man living in a moment rather than doing strategic planning. He's trying to just assess the current situation and trying to grab a chance. But I might be wrong. So what's your take on his leadership style?
Yeah. So there's multiple levels happening simultaneously. I think Vlad Vexler is the guy that I would look to first for perspective on this, and then I would look to Constantine and Inside Russia. I know some people don't like Constantine, think he's some kind of grifter or something. I like Constantine because he gives me a window of insight, and he gives me that insight because he actually lived in America, so he can kind of translate the Western, what's going on in a Russian mindset to a Western perspective, and so that's helpful. So what I see is, like, people will talk about, and I talked about this in the video just like a week or two ago, that people would be like, if you could just get rid of Putin, we could be. I don't know that that's it. I know Putin's a bad guy, but there's also an authoritarian mindset within Russia that you don't see in Ukraine. Like from '91, the countries have diverged very differently. One very much trying to go west, like Poland has done, like Lithuania and the Baltic states have done, right? And the other doubling down on going back toward an authoritarian track over time, especially in the last year they've doubled down. So there's this authoritarian mindset where so I talked about how I don't believe that the population will rise up and overthrow Putin. I don't think it's possible.
Definitely not.
Yeah, and the reason is they're so apathetic because they've had this kind of generations of being beaten down over time. Like if you don't, raise political problems, you're not going to go to jail or the gulag or whatever, right? And then when they had freedom, they kind of didn't get away from that. And more recently, like people have gone to jail for holding up a blank sign at a protest. I mean, like you can't say war. You have to say special military operation, that kind of thing. So I think that Putin is the wrong guy at this time that's dragging them down. But if you replaced him with somebody else, everybody else would just kind of have this mentality of like, well, we just got to follow him. And that's just the way that it works. I was watching 1420 and they were talking about like, so do you think it's a problem that people are getting thrown out of, hotel balconies, oligarchs that have said something? And honestly, they would say things like, well, people fall out of hotel balconies in every country. I'm like,
yeah, it happens all the time. So, it's just in Russia they have problems a little bit with high-rise construction practices, I would guess, especially for oligarchs. It's just very unsafe for them.
Yeah, so I think there's something culturally that's different. And I recognize this. I was in Lithuania in 2001, just after the Twin Towers were hit. I was at a conference in the Lithuanian parliament, the Seimas. And when I was there, I would hear people say things that I was like, so somebody said something like, well, we just need one good leader to lead us. And I'm thinking like, no, that's like a Soviet, we called it the Soviet hangover, right? Because in the West, we don't think like that at all. And the further West, I'm pretty sure that where you are, you don't think that way. In Britain, in America, we don't think that way at all. Like, we just need one good leader. No. I mean, like, there has to be a scaffolding of leadership all throughout the system. Otherwise, the system doesn't work. But, yeah, I think, and now that was 2001, and Lithuania has moved headlong the right direction, but the Russians are still kind of there. And that's not going to play well for them. And it doesn't play well even in their military leadership, the way that things, like you lop off a general, the colonels don't know what to do because, well, is there another general to tell me what to do? I mean, you just don't see that in the West. You see a solid officer and NCO corps. So, okay, anyway.
Yeah, but that's the same transformation that's basically happening with Ukrainian army as well. So I think it's a very good parallel that you drew, that Ukraine got essentially put under stress, adapt or die, basically after 2014. And I know that there's right now analysts that kind of reviewing the Russian offensive and saying that's like there's actually. If Russia would just use the resources that it would have just a little bit smartly, then Ukraine would not have any chance. And I tend to agree with them. But I think one of the kind of major things that actually allowed Ukraine to survive and save them is the fact that the transformation that in their leadership changed a little bit over time. That a lot of the more independent thought, a lot more discussion, and this is where, for example, my big problem with the recent news comes in, where a lot of analysts right now, they are reading frontline reports from the people in the trenches, and they're saying, "Oh, this is horrible. We're dying here in Bakhmut because our commander is General Surovikin. General Syrsky." And Syrsky is kind of infamously known in the Ukrainian military because he was the commander in charge during 2014 Debaltseve operation. This is where one of the two kind of big, like Debaltseve and Ilovaisk, where Ukrainians essentially got into the cauldron and got slaughtered. And unfortunately, the parallels are being driven. However, I think, and you can correct me on that, maybe you've noted how leadership in Ukraine has changed, is that what I'm hearing is that decisions are not being made as in 2014. It's not just one commander that is having his part, his region, and then he's responsible for everything. That the whole command chain and structure has been changed over time, and now it's a lot more discussed, more independent on the places, and also something that they come together with. I don't know, bounce back critique and whatnot. But I think it stems from Zelensky. You tell me.
Yeah, no, you're right about Zelensky. I can't speak to the particular commander, although I do know what you're talking about, the encirclement and that kind of thing. So I can't speak to him, but I can't speak to the system. And the system, since 2014, has had a NATO overhaul, so a Western-style thinking about how to do things in many ways, in weapons, in tactics, in after-action reviews, in decision-making in general. Since you referenced Zelensky, look at the difference between Putin trying to actually manage strikes in Donbass from the safety of the Kremlin, and Zelensky being hands-off about that, letting his generals kind of do, not that he's not involved, like he still has the final say, but letting his generals be generals and letting him sing his high notes, which are communicating with foreign leaders, saying the right things in speeches, communicating to all these foreign dignitaries, like when he talked to the British and invoked Churchill, or talked to the Americans and was speaking about, you know what it was like on 9/11. We feel that every day. I read this morning that this was an article from yesterday, 4,500 shells or bombs or whatever have hit Ukraine. So, sorry, not 4,500, 40,500 bombs or shells over the last year. I'm like, what? Like, so he's aware of that, and that's not. Well, okay,
just a bit too low.
Okay, so this was from the Interior Ministry report or something like that.
I believe it's missiles. I believe it's missiles.
Missiles. Sorry, I'm not talking about just like artillery shells. I'm talking about it's huge, and Zelensky is not going, well, I'm the commander in chief, so you better do what I. No, he's singing his high notes by doing what he does well and leaving the military decision apparatus doing what it does well, and they've done a great job. Now, they do have support, right? They do have NATO help and U.S. satellites and all kinds of other things to help guide them. He knows. Now, here's what Zelensky has done absolutely masterfully. He knows that he can't lose his partners, and because he can't lose his partners, he plays the game very differently. So this has caused him to headlong move toward the EU. And root out corruption and work so you don't see the kind of atrocity that we saw last week. The soldier being gunned down, just standing there saying "Slava Ukraini" and being shot. You're not, I don't think, going to see a retribution on the other side. As much as it made my blood boil, I'm not even Ukrainian. I don't have any, right? But it made me so angry because these are my values being defied, right? I know you have a much more of a link to this than I do, right? A personal link. I don't, but so people are like, well, why do you care so much? These are my values. How do I not support Ukraine, right? Okay, so back to where we were. Like, I don't think you'll see a counter of that because the Ukrainians understand that they have to hold their Western partners. They have to have dignity in spite of the way that the Russians are so dehumanizing in the way that they're attacking them. So anyway, I'm not sure I answered your question at this point.
Yeah, no. I mean, like it's not about answering a question. We're trying to kind of talk and give other opinion, and people in comments will be the judge of how useful or not useful it was. They're probably going to judge my language skills again, which is totally fine.
I wouldn't worry about that. I mean, I think that just getting. I think the whole point of this is let's just get as much insight and understanding as we can about it from all different directions. Like, you focus on different things than I do, right? I focus on kind of big picture things as much. I started off trying to do daily updates, and I did that because I wrote. Okay, so when the war started, I was sitting around the table the week before the war started with my colleagues at the university saying, Putin won't invade. Like, he's just saber rattling. He just wants to get a deal. I mean, I thought that. And then I was at an academic conference where I hear Putin invaded. I'm like, what? He actually did that? And then I'm thinking, uh-oh, that's bad. Then I hear Zelensky say the "I need ammunition, not a ride" line. And I think, whoa, who is this guy? I need to know everything that I can about this guy. And in 3 weeks, I wrote a Kindle book about Zelensky's background, and then I updated it for the next 4 months, like daily updated it for the next on Kindle for the next 4 months. And then at a certain point, I said, like, this isn't having the impact that I want it to have by itself. I'm doing these updates anyway. I'm trying to understand what's going on. And I stopped updating the book at that point and just switched to YouTube, doing the same thing with the daily updates, and just started from about day 85 doing daily update videos. And then I switched to just like, let me just try to take and just give the big picture, because that's what I was kind of leaning toward anyway. Just that's my propensity, right? So we have different perspectives, but even then, I wasn't like the military analyst. I never claimed to be a military analyst. And people with real military experience would be like, you probably don't want to talk about it like that. Which side of the river it was on, or that kind of thing. Yeah, that's not my strong suit. I don't claim to be. But we all come to it from different perspectives, and I find that it's really useful to triangulate. My perspective is one thing. Your perspective is another, and you spend more time within the what's going on the ground. Anna from Ukraine is awesome because I get here's context of how she's thinking. Orst Zub, I don't know if you're familiar with him. His video just makes it real. Like, wow, that's what it looks like when a missile hits a building or whatever. So all these different players help us understand. Jake Bro, Dennis Davdov. Dennis Davdov's the one that got me going. Right? I was like, man, I should be doing that. and his insights were particularly profound. So anyway. So that's what got me going. How did you get started? Other than obviously the very close family connection, but what were you seeing at the time when you got started?
Sure, yeah, it's a story that's as old as day, basically, for me now. That there was just a couple of people that really wanted to understand what's happening in Ukraine, and because they were mostly taking information from the local media, their perspectives were way off of what the actual situation was on the ground. Mm-hmm. Whereas because I just have the language skills, because instead of just getting news from the media, I get the information from Telegram channels and whatnot. I was just able to explain just a little bit. And from there, it's kind of started going a little bit more. And at some point, I just started posting videos and turned the situation on. And then I discovered that someone like Dennis is actually doing it. So it's funny because people say I'm copying Dennis, whereas I'm actually discovered Dennis much later than I was actually I started doing whatever thing. So it was pretty fun. But overall, that's my perspective. So my only kind of take is that there is a lot more. I've seen that people focus a lot on the map, a lot on the movements, and I always try to bring people just to kind of take a little bit of a step back. I know your perspective is a little bit different than mine, where you also kind of say, okay, step back, but we need to understand this whole situation and the political implications. Whereas I say is okay, more of a maybe the war stuff. How is it how we looking in a big picture? Because people discussing right now Bakhmut and saying, oh, it's terrible. But for me, I'm always trying to essentially try to focus on the bigger thing, because Bakhmut is just one minuscule point. Because the actual big picture in the war sense is that supposedly second world largest army that was about to challenge NATO and was about to essentially go head to head with the US is now a year later fighting in Ukraine, cannot take a city within 7 months.
Yeah, isn't that amazing too, that the second best army in the world supposedly is now the second best army in Ukraine. Yeah. Right?
It's a joke.
And it's been that they have been at this for so long for political reasons. That's the fascinating thing about Bakhmut. There's no real military value out of it. Oh yes, we can roll up it. No, you can't, because you're about to go uphill. When you get to the next line, it's not going to work out for you. So they're fighting on this for political reasons, not for military reasons, which is absolutely astonishing from the Russian side. From the Ukrainian side, it makes sense because they're fighting on that ground that doesn't really matter, because they're getting a much higher kill rate for the Russians than they are for the Ukrainians. And that right? So for that reason, it makes more sense. But it's a really bizarre thing to watch.
Yeah, it's debatable if there is a significantly higher kill rates. I know I'm hearing like 10-1, 7-1, 5-1.
I don't believe
I
10 to
don't think,
1.
no,
I don't believe 10 to 1,
so.
but there is so you have a dug in defensive posture, and that's just going to give you some advantage.
Again, discussable. Like a lot of people are challenging it because saying that right now it's a essentially hand-to-hand combat, so the dug-in part doesn't really exist.
At a certain point, they're going to have to go.
Correct.
Right? I mean, if they just get overwhelmed at a certain point, that's true. But in the initial phases of it, it was just. I mean, trying to cut across a huge field to get there was just, I mean, getting mowed down. So
yeah. I mean, like that's another thing. We're surprised, like because one of the big surprising things, right? If we're talking just generally, is just the tolerance for casualties on the Russian side is stupendous. I can understand this on Ukrainian side because they are the defending party. They are actually saying is like, well, if we just give up, they're going to kill all of us. Because that's what we're seeing. We're seeing torture chambers found in Kherson, one after another. We're finding like basements where people essentially torture, saying like, "Do you know anyone that was participating in the armed forces of Ukraine?" Because apparently, if it's an armed forces, then it's automatically Nazis, probably also mosquito blood donors or whatnot. But the thing is, why our Russians are so dedicated? Is this just the leadership? Why are they so acceptable? We talked a little bit about the Russian society, right? I know it's more about a question maybe to Vlad Vexler, but like at which point the leadership can break down this? Like, is there a balance ratio where it's like people with this structure of leadership can say go die, and then the people below say no, you go die?
yeah, so that's really the fascinating thing. That same apathy is causing them to like run headlong into slaughter. Where like but they're not doing it well, and that's, I mean, it's like the worst of all worlds, right? Yes. You have bad leaders giving bad information or bad direction to people who will go and die and not do it and not have a great impact, and so it's like bad all the way down the line. Where on the other side, the Ukrainians are highly motivated for all the reasons that you just said. And, Napoleon said the moral is to the physical as 3 is to the 1. The morale is sky high on the Ukrainian side, saying, look, we've got to do this. This is an existential fight. So I don't know. I don't think there's the enthusiasm on the other side, but they are constrained by that same apolitical thing that doesn't allow them not to. It's a really bizarre thing.
Yeah, I mean, agreed. That's something that I think will be studied for years after this war is over. And I think one of the most important things for me that to talk to you about, also the person that kind of has this oversight from the US perspective, is that a lot of my subscribers, and I'm pretty sure someone in your comments have already been talking about the fact that like if Trump comes, then Ukraine is done. Basically, to put it bluntly. What's your take on it?
So let me broaden the discussion away from Trump, and then we'll come back to Trump.
Sure.
So there is way too much hyperbolic frothing at the mouth from people, especially if they come from the left. I'm a political conservative, right? And people are like, you're conservative and you support Ukraine? Well, do you know any conservatives? Because most of us do. Like that's really the thing. Like liberals tend to think that conservatives don't actually support Ukraine because they don't know enough of us to know that the majority of us do. There are some loudmouths that get a lot of attention that the liberal left-leaning kind of press in the United States particularly amplifies for its own press purposes. They're bad. I don't like Green. I don't like what's his name in Florida. There are a couple people that are just.
DeSantis? Was it DeSantis?
No, not DeSantis. The Florida congressman that is also with Marjorie Taylor Greene making a lot of waves. There's a handful of them, and so Trump obviously is a wild card there. But, Mike Pence was full-throated, his former vice president, who might actually become a contender, full-throated supporter of Ukraine. His former ambassador, Nikki Haley, who is running as well, is full-throated support for Ukraine. DeSantis was somewhere in the middle. He just was a little cautionary. You heard the Speaker of the House say the no blank check thing, but that's a slap at Biden. That's right. So you got to understand, you can separate these things. So here's the thing. I could, as a conservative, I could have opposed FDR and still thought that Hitler was the devil, right? I mean, I could have opposed his domestic policies and still thought Hitler's bad and needs to be. So it's the same kind of thing here. So there's a lot of conservatives that I call myself a Reagan conservative. And I say that in the sense, like, what would Reagan have done in this situation? He'd be like, how much do you need? Like, what can we provide for you so that you could, right? So that's the way that I approach this. And so do most of the conservatives that I know. Now, there are some conservatives, or they're more like populists than conservatives. It's a little bit different. They're more nationalist, more like isolationist kind of something. And Tucker Carlson, he works my nerves like nobody. I actually agree with him on. I agree with him on some domestic points, right? But I can't even watch him anymore because he's like spouting RT. And when you are cited hundreds of times in RT, you're on the wrong side. Right? I mean, that's just the way that works. So Tucker is one of the big mouthpieces of that. Now, let's go back to Trump. So it's fascinating the division between conservatives and liberals on this. Every liberal I know says, well, Trump would have just rolled over and given it to Putin. He would have worked with Putin to get. Every conservative I know that is like me on this says it wouldn't have happened during Trump. Now, there's a reason for that, because we can all admit that Trump has a huge ego, right?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
everybody agrees on that, right?
That's one of the things about politics that people underestimate. They always think is like, oh, it's about interest business. No. A lot of personality goes into it. Like when
that's exactly right. And for Trump, and John Bolton made this exact point, that Trump wasn't about policy, and Putin was kind of running around him on policy, circling him, right? But on ego, like he would have thought, like, I can make a deal. Maybe he could have thought he could have made a deal, but he would never have allowed Putin to make the U.S. and the West look terrible on his watch, right? I think that would have changed. This is how conservatives filter that. Now, Trump is now moving into a place where he's getting a little bit worse, saying, I could, because he's all about the deal, like the art of the deal. I can make a deal with anybody. I can work with them. But he's getting to a place where he's saying, I could end the war without any specifics or anything. I don't know that he can, and I think he's losing much of his base.
Didn't he solve the Palestine-Israel crisis last time?
Well, actually, he made the gutsy move to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, which he got a lot of flack for. Like, so he'll stand up for certain things, but obviously not fixing Palestine. But so he thinks that he could do that. I think he's losing his base as he's staking out that ground. And I don't think it's going to go his way. But yeah, Biden's not my guy. I don't like him politically. But on Ukraine, since the invasion, before the invasion, he didn't do enough to deter. Right? Now he's not the only one. President Bush in 2008 made a huge mistake by just saying strong words and not doing anything with Georgia. President Obama made a huge mistake by not doing anything in 2014. Right? So, like, I'm slapping every direction.
It was not even 2014 with Obama. A lot of the things forget that after Georgia 2008, essentially the invasion, I believe it was it 2012 that when they came to Russia with like a big reboot button.
Yeah, the reset button.
Yeah, reset button.
Obama was worthless with that, right? Bush made a mistake. Obama made mistakes. Trump, nothing happened on his watch, and he touts that. But that's because I think Putin was looking like, hey, he's kind of being my wrecking ball here accidentally. Like, I don't think it was like designed behind the scenes, I'm going to work with Putin. I think it was just, he's a business guy, like, hey, NATO, you're not pulling your fair share. And so if Trump is kind of being a wrecking ball there, Putin was going to let him be a wrecking ball, right? I think that's a legit read of it. So nothing happened with Trump, but it's not just because of, I'm tough. It's because, like, Putin was just taking a wait-and-see attitude. Yeah. With Biden, he smelled extra weakness between January 6th and domestic issues in the United States, right? Afghanistan, the pullout, watching the people fall off the planes, like, the United States not going to do anything. And Biden didn't do enough to deter Like, you have to signal strength to an authoritarian. I mean, that's how bullies operate. Bullies don't pick on the jock football player, right? They pick on the skinny kid in the corner of the, playground that, can't defend himself. So I think Putin smelled weakness, thought that he could get away with it, nothing was going to happen. And if he knew that what was going to happen now would have happened, he never would have done it. So I give Biden terrible marks before, and then I give him amazingly good marks after. From the point that it happened, he's done almost everything right. He's been a little too slow for my taste, but he's trying to hold a coalition together, trying not to cross over red lines. And the red lines, Putin's honestly deterred Biden more than we've deterred him, right? But he's getting it, right? He's crossing red line after red line after red line. So he's been going the right direction. So, I mean, regardless of my own political instincts, I got to give him props. And so, but that's how I view what's going on.
And I think it's a fair view. And I believe that this crosses our red line for today's session, just not to get too long. I thank you so much for participating. I would really hope that we can maybe participate a little bit more. What I propose, like in my channel, I'm interacting with the people on my channel all the time, right? Because I'm not an information source in a sense that I know it all and I just tell it. I'm a guy on YouTube that just reads a lot of analysts and so on when people don't have, because people work their jobs, they don't have the time to be in this huge sphere of what's actually happening. Is there tactical movement, whatnot? So, and I'm interacting a lot with people. So I propose people to essentially write any kind of questions and whatnot, and we do a second round of this at some point.
Sure, absolutely. Let's do it. My channel, if you just look up my name, look up dr or YouTube /@dr.gerdes. That's my name. You'll find the channel. There's two. There's an older channel that was all about leadership stuff, and then I pivoted about the time that the Ukraine war started and just went headlong into just Ukraine stuff. And I mean, the kinds of things that I'm explaining here, that's what you'll find. So I'm happy to interact with anyone as well and answer whatever questions. And thank you for your time, Georgie. I really appreciate it.
You're always welcome. And I'm Georgie from Ukraine Matters. Thank you so much for watching. Slava Ukraini, and I'll see you guys next time.